This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is Dean Friedman. He is an American singer and songwriter who first marked his entry into pop consciousness with the top 20 success of his infectious hit single, Ariel, a quirky, irresistible, and uncategorizable pop song about a free-spirited, pot-smoking, vegetarian Jewish girl in a peasant blouse who lived the lyrics as the lyrics goes, way on the other side of the Hudson. Friedman scored again with the release of his follow-up album, Well, Well, Said the Rocking Chair, and the new classic hit single, Lucky Stars. This magical duet performed with the singer, Denise Marsa, zoomed to the top of the UK charts, going instantly gold. Lucky Stars paved the way for a slew of Friedman hits, including familiar radio staples such as Lydia, Rocking Chair, McDonald's Girl, and Woman of Mine. Friedman's songwriting and performing have earned him loyal international following, devoted to the sophisticated, funny, and profound work of a master songsmith. It's a pleasure to have you on, Dean.
Pleasure to be here, Catherine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I know we have a common friend, Michael Cirilli. I think Michael has done some work with you over the years.
Indeed. He helped put together the studio that I used to record my Songs for Grown-Ups album, and Michael engineered a lot of that, and he's a good guy.
Yeah, super talented. So thanks again for being on. I really have done a lot of research on you, and I'm really very much impressed with what you've done over your career. I was a very young girl in the early 70s, and I actually remember Ariel being on the radio. So that's kind of a little note I'd like to make, because it was really a big hit. And I live on this side of the Hudson River, so in the Yonkers side of the Hudson River. So I just want to, let the audience kind of find out more about you. How did you start this? Because I understand that as a young boy, you actually were kind of fascinated early on with getting involved in music. And if I understand correctly, you got your first guitar from Manny's Music. Is that correct?
It is. I bought it with a bag of quarters that I had earned delivering newspapers in Paramus, New Jersey, the Bergen Record. And I threw the bag of quarters on the counter, and I said, I'd like that guitar, please. Started strumming chords, learned enough 4 chords to sing a lot of Beatles tunes and Monkees tunes, and then started writing some of my own. And I never stopped.
That's so great. So did you come from a musical family?
Absolutely. My mom was a singer and performer on Broadway and in film, and there was always some Broadway show tune on the piano or some aria playing on the record player. So I grew up in a house filled with music. So it was inevitable that it was going to be a part of my life. But when I was a teenager and started playing coffee houses, and getting paid, $10-15 to do a gig, I thought, wow, this is great. I'm doing something that I love to do anyway, and they're giving me money for it, so that's not so bad.
Yeah, that's great. There's another thing that I saw when I was looking into you, that you actually just don't play the guitar. You ended up playing other instruments. So when did you start to, move past the guitar?
Well, I had piano lessons when I was really little, when I was 5, and then I got my guitar when I was, I guess, 8 or 9. And then over the years, I've picked up different instruments, like, harmonica and ukulele. And so, these days with synthesizers and samplers and electronic keyboards and digital studio audio workstations, really, the recording studio becomes one big giant instrument controlled by a keyboard or a guitar. Even though my main instruments are guitar and piano, modern technology sort of provides the facility for you to play almost any instrument if you have some understanding of the gesture and the phrasing that's endemic to that instrument.
Yes, well, it's really amazing. So you did end up going for music. I think you majored in it at a city college in New York. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I had a lot of great teachers, folks like Stan Persky and Barry Galbraith. So I learned a lot, and it was a big influence. That sort of supplemented my early radio education, listening to WMCA and the Good Guys, and growing up on the Beatles and the Supremes and Dylan and the Monkees and everything that was on top 40 radio when I was a kid. Plus, the music was part of my mom's world, classical and Broadway show tunes. Those were all influences, and then eventually I was heavily influenced by the whole generation of singer-songwriters, folks like Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon and James Taylor and Bernie Taupin and Elton John, folks who were telling stories and painting pictures with their words and music, evoking very vivid imagery, where you could picture yourself in the story that was being told. And those kinds of songs always made an impression on me. And starting out, those are the kinds of songs I aspired to write myself, and still to this day. That's what I have in mind, is to sort of invite the listener into the song so that they become part of it, almost like collaborators, co-writers.
Yeah, that's really neat. You definitely have done that, especially with Ariel. We're kind of like going back in time. I mean, we're going back into the 70s. Nowadays, we have The Voice or we have American Idol. How did you make your big break? Like, how did you kind of connect with getting a manager or having a recording contract? How did that all come about? Because back then, we didn't have the internet. Now everything is Facebook and Instagram and, TikToking and all that.
Well, except for some very rare viral instances, probably the same in many respects as it is in almost every business, which is sort of came down to stubborn persistence and finally making a personal connection. I've been writing songs since I was 9 and sending out demos since I was about 15 and getting rejection letters from every major recording studio, record label in the States. When I was going to City College in New York, CCNY, I was in the music department and I took a class on vocal pop music. And one of the guest lecturers was a musician named David Bromberg, who's a lot of people consider the godfather of Americana. He's just a brilliant performer, songwriter, killer instrumentalist. And I kept nudging him to listen to the songs I'd written, and finally he relented. and he introduced me to the folks who became my managers, the guys who ran and managed the Bottom Line nightclub down in the Village. At the time, it was the premier showcase for all the record labels in New York. And so that became sort of a launching pad for me, where they took me to an independent label. The first label they took me to, Lifesong Records, offered me a deal. And the first single of the first album right out of the box was Ariel, and it was a top 20 hit. And that sort of kicked things off. It seemed like it was an overnight occasion, but, I'd been working hard at it for years.
So you actually wrote the words to Ariel, correct?
Indeed, yeah. It was sort of a description of all girls had a crush on growing up as a teenager in the suburbs in Bergen County and Paramus, New Jersey. A lot of the details in it were things that happened to me or to friends and family around me. And, in some ways, it's sort of a geographical time capsule of that particular location in Paramus. It name checks a lot of actual places, like the Dairy Queen and the, volunteer ambulance corps. And I'm one of those writers where it helps me, and hopefully the audience, if I populate the lyrics with a lot of concrete information, with a lot of detail. And for me, that helps depict the story that I'm telling, the scene the story takes place in. I think that helps the listener as well to root themselves. Even if they've never been in that particular place, it's going to give them an association with an experience they've had in their life that will sort of help them experience what the song is about. And, I think in part that's what resonated with folks and made it so familiar and, got folks calling up WNEW FM to play it over and over again.
Yes, I think it's interesting because it really is kind of a shout out to New York. I know in that song you do reference a New York radio station, and you're also referencing like a local like TV. I think it's CBS. It's also kind of mentioned along that too. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's all real world stuff that happened. Although TV stations don't sign off the air anymore by playing the national anthem, but in those days they did. About 2:00 in the morning, there was no more TV, and there was no internet then. And then, so, there was nothing else for a couple of teenagers to do but make out in the living room. That's what the song's about.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I actually recently played it for someone, and the minute I had it, not even like 4 or 5 seconds in, they named it. So it's really like a compliment to you that, even many years later, just, literally just a few notes in, they can name it. So that to me is really like a great testament to that song for you. How did you move on past Ariel? Because it seemed like you were getting hit with a lot of opportunities early on.
It was a sort of a curious trajectory. I delivered the second album to my record company. When I presented it to them, they called me into their office. Now, it was something I was really proud of, that album. I'd worked on it with the band and all these really talented musicians. And we'd done what I knew was a really good job. And I was shocked when I walked into the record label and they chastised me for making what they claimed was a terrible album. And they were very sort of acoustic oriented, and they didn't like the sort of the band direction that I had taken with fuller accompaniment, more of a New York City groove. And so they just chastised me for a good hour, telling me what a terrible record I delivered, and didn't listen to anybody. I was a spoiled recording artist. Now, I knew they were wrong, but it was sort of surprising to hear that kind of a feedback from them. But even more satisfying when a week later, we learned that the first single off of the second album became a huge hit in England. And that went on to further change the trajectory of my career, which explains why I spend a lot of time, over the last 4 decades, hopping across the pond to tour all over the UK and Ireland. Because that's where larger part of my audience continues to reside. And even though it's a little bit of a schlep, I don't mind it because they're a very enthusiastic and loyal audience.
So what was that second song that surprised them so much?
Well, it was a duet called Lucky Stars, and it raced up the charts and has become sort of a classic hit single on that side of the pond. And the woman who sings the duet with me, her name is Denise Marsa. I met her at a CBS recording studio and was impressed by her voice. And at the time, I had been, before signing with the independent label, I'd been driving in a taxi cab in New York City. That's how I paid the rent. And all during that time, I was listening to a lot of country music on the radio. In those days, there were not a lot of pop duets. This is before, Elton John and Kiki D did Don't Go Breaking My Heart. But there has always been a long tradition of pop duets in country music. So in some ways, Lucky Stars was my pop version of a country duet because the subject matter is all about jealousy and marital strife and, having a fight and squabbling and then making up at the end. All the material that you hear in a typical country music song. So, in fact, again, the label so disapproved of the album. They said, why do you want to have a duet on your second album? You're a solo artist. And I had to argue with them. I said, it's a nice song. I think people are going to like it. And fortunately, I was able to keep it on the album. Kicked things off for me in a big way across the pond in the UK and Ireland and, some other European territories down in Australia, South Africa, New Zealand. It was a really big hit, and it's enabled me to continue pursuing the music that I've been doing all these years.
Yeah, that's really great. That's amazing. Most recently I was listening to Lydia, and it's just, there's something so soothing about that song. So was that based on a personal experience for you, or are you just, writing from what you would say is like storytelling, or is it more personal for you?
I'd have to say that I'm one of those writers that abides the axiom that you write what you know. But having said that, I also make ample use of my poetic license, which is a nice way of saying that I get to lie and make things up. So I'd say that almost all my songs are based on some aspect of real life in my life or the lives of my friends or family or just, the world around me in general. But then I will, change it to turn it into a song that tells a story that just inspires me to impart. So a song like Lydia, well, actually, it was based on someone that I knew starting out in those early days of my wayward youth. Although I actually tried to use her roommate's name to protect the not so innocent, but then her roommate got mad at me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can imagine, right? They're probably all was trying to figure out who's who, right?
Yeah.
So another thing what was early on in your career is it seems that you were able to get involved in doing television commercials. And, you do have a hit, which is called McDonald's Girl. But you had done some other commercial stuff. So do you want to speak about that?
Well, I'd been doing vocal work. One that was especially fun was the classic Crazy Eddie commercial. Oh, when you think you're ready, come on down to Crazy Eddie. I didn't write that, but I was invited to sing an updated version of it one summer, which was enormous fun because it's such a great song. And then after the new recording of it was issued, I was also invited to perform it at one of the Crazy Eddie company meetings, which was held at the Beacon Theater. And I sang that in front of a huge audience of Crazy Eddie employees, accompanied on stage by singing appliances. There was a singing boombox.
Oh, that's funny.
It was one of those surreal moments that it's actually on YouTube somewhere. But
I'd love to find that. I know Crazy Eddie was huge. I remember the whole kind of dramatic commercial and him, screaming, "It's insane!" Till this day, people reference Crazy Eddie. It was kind of a local, especially here in this area in New York. Crazy Eddie was really big.
A classic.
Yeah. So tell me more about McDonald's Girl, because I was kind of speaking about you to some friends of mine, and that's literally what they said. They said it was the McDonald's Girl, which they reference or tied to your name.
Well, my third album was an album called Rumpled Romeo, and it was filled with songs about teenage romance and adolescent angst. One of the tracks on it was a love song to this girl who worked at McDonald's. And it was something that I always believed in as a pure pop song. But when it was released in England, because they had very strict rules against anything that smacked of commercialism or that named in those days a commercial brand, because the BBC in England is a government-run radio station, and it's only at that time. When Rumpled Romeo came out and McDonald's Girl was released, there was not a lot of commercial radio in England or the United Kingdom. As a result, it was banned by the BBC. That was around 1980. So that was very frustrating when it was banned. But fortunately, just a few years after that, a then unknown band out of Canada with the unlikely name of Bare Naked Ladies did a cover version of my song, McDonald's Girl. And it was their first airplay hit in Canada. And a few years after that, a band called the Blenders, a great a cappella group, did another cover version of McDonald's Girl, which went to #1 in Norway. And then YouTube came along, and McDonald's Girl was sort of the little song that insisted on being heard because it went viral on YouTube. And, there's hundreds of different versions of McDonald's Girl from all over the world. So it was something I was really proud of. But it was almost 33 years later, after the song was banned, that I finally got a call from corporate headquarters of McDonald's saying, Mr. Friedman, we're very pleased. We'd like to license your song for a national TV and radio campaign. And I said, that's great. What took you so long? But it was a lot of fun. It was very exciting. They changed some of the lyrics because apparently McDonald's corporate headquarters took issue with her being an angel in a polyester uniform. So she's now an angel in a Golden Arches uniform, but she's still an angel.
Oh, wow. I really can appreciate that because now we have so many fast food places and so many choices for children if they want to eat out or take out with their families. But in the 70s, that was one of the few. I remember maybe Pizza Hut and McDonald's. So that's really classic. And it's, to me, it has more of like a home feeling to it, because if you grew up in the 70s, you would see a McDonald's girl. They always had people standing at the counter taking orders. I don't really remember drive-thrus as much. I remember actually walking in the 70s and ordering your food. So they always had staff there, and most of it was girls. So that's kind of like really like a real home feeling.
Well, it's America's fast comfort food.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So you have done quite a lot up until this point. And I guess to me, when I was looking into your life, I found so completely fascinating was that you didn't just stay in music. You got involved in some things that were maybe stepping to the side of actual music. I had watched a video of you, and you told this really great story about being in this recording studio, and I think you answered the phone and someone had asked who knows how to do some work with synthesizers, and you kind of talk them into being able to write a complete guide on synthesizers and drum machines. Is that correct? Because I really thought that was amazing timing and such a perfect story.
Well, it was serendipitous. I had just been to a keyboard and synthesizer exhibition at Kennedy Airport that was put on by Sam Ash Music. And I had been renting time on a synclavier, which at the time was the top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art, most expensive synthesizer in the world, which I couldn't afford. But David Nichtern, who was the North American distributor for this very powerful synthesizer, allowed me to go into the studio for like a really low rate once a week, for a couple hours to learn this brand new synthesizer that was so cool. So I didn't have a lot of experience with electronic instruments or synthesizers, but I knew this very powerful one very well. So when the phone call came in asking for someone to write on the new generation of synthesizers and sequencers and drum machines, I was filled with information that was newly acquired. And so I talked my way into the gig, and I wrote what became the first consumer guide for synthesizers, sequencers, and drum machines, which you can still find online on Amazon. And then I wrote a book called Synthesizer Basics. And then I did a 3-part Intro to Synthesis video series, which went viral 30 years after it was released, and is still used today on YouTube as the go-to place for any keyboard player or producer or electronic dance music, synthesist player or sound creator. Because even though more than 3 decades have passed since it was produced and released, and even though all these synthesizers and electronic instruments have evolved over many generations, the basic physics of sound has not changed at all. And that's what I talk about in those synthesizer lessons. They, as I say, they continue to be the go-to instructional videos for anyone interested in learning about electronic music synthesis. And so that's something I'm real pleased about.
That's very impressive, especially if you're writing something that's considered a user guide. You have to think about how you're going to write it so that it's, someone can actually follow the steps or maybe retain it as knowledge. And some of my career, I was doing some work as a military instructor, and many times we would have to write a curriculum and figure out how we were going to break the classes down so that, it was in retainable bites for people. Did you find that a challenge, since this is probably the first thing that you wrote in an instructional manner?
Well, I think that what was helpful is the fact that I had only just learned it myself. And it was all very fresh and brand new in my head. And the steps that I took to understand it were the very steps that I used to explain it. And because it was fresh in my mind, and because I'd learned it myself, I hadn't taken any classes, I think I was able to explain some of these complicated aspects of electronic music in layman's terms, in language that made sense to people that they could relate to, with very simple illustrations and examples and demonstrations. And I think that's why it became and remains so popular. And that's one of the main comments people make on the YouTube pages, which is that it's, the typical comment would be, I studied audio engineering for 4 years and I didn't understand how to generate sounds until I watched your videos. So that's satisfying as an instructor, as a teacher, to explain something complicated but in simple terms that people can then grasp and use.
Yeah, that's an amazing compliment. And it's terrific that it's still available and that people can still kind of comment on it and give you that feedback. You really must have an engineering mind, because I also understand that you got involved. Now, this period of time, just so the audience knows that you put together this synthesizer guide, was around 1985. And not far long after that, I think you got involved in creating a video camera toy. Is that correct?
I had been attending music and audio conventions, and I witnessed a demonstration of a new technology by a group called Vivid that was doing a camera-based interface with animation and video. And what we now are familiar with by way of the Microsoft Kinect box or the Xbox, the idea that you see yourself on a TV monitor interacting in real time with animated objects that respond to your touch. Well, I saw an early demonstration of that, one of the first, in about 1986 at a trade show. And it blew my mind. I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I bought a developer kit. And it just was so fascinating. I was compelled to teach myself the software and how to use the tool. And in 1989, I created a game called Eat a Bug, and licensed it to Nickelodeon Television for a show that was called Total Panic, where a kid in the TV audience would go in front of the camera and see themselves in an animated garden filled with bugs and bees and flies and spiders, and play a game and interact. You'd have to grab all the little bugs and avoid the big bug. And it became a hit, and it led on to another Nickelodeon series called, first there was Total Panic, and it went on to another series that I did a dozen interactive in video games is what I describe them, because basically you are in the video. And again, it was a big successful TV show for Nickelodeon, and it led to my developing interactive virtual reality game environments for theme parks and museums around the world, and places like Fuji Television in Japan. We went to Tokyo and designed a game for them. So during the late 80s and through the mid 90s, I was designing VR games for TV and theme parks and museums and entertainment centers. And it was crazy. It was a lot of fun. It was very exciting. It was state of the art. Bear in mind that this was more than a decade before Microsoft came out with the Kinect box and the things that you can now do in your living room for, with a $150 game module. But in those days, we were doing it with a system that it would cost about $15,000, $20,000 to put together. So it was very exciting. But at some point, it's like, that Al Pacino line, just trying to get out, they pull me back in. At some point, I had an opportunity to do a new album after a period of almost 16, 17 years where I hadn't recorded, and made a deal to do Songs for Grownups, a double album in 98, I guess, 1998. And it brought me back into the music business, even though I never left. I mean, even when I was doing my video games and virtual reality environments, there was always some musical component to it. Music was always something that I did. I never stopped writing songs, and I never stopped being a musician. But in '98, I got a chance to go back in the studio and record new material that I'd been working on for years. And I've been doing that ever since.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting because that portion of you writing and getting involved with Nickelodeon is really interesting to me. I think you are the president and creative director for in video games. In case anyone's interested, that's current, correct?
Well, I haven't done it in a while, but you can find in video systems, or if you just type in Dean Friedman in video, you'll find it on YouTube, and you can see all the games we did for Nickelodeon TV and Fuji and museums around the world. And like I say, it was really fun, exciting, creative stuff. It also gave me an opportunity to do other kinds of exhibits for museums, interactive children's musical instruments and musical playground instruments that kids could climb on and play on, make all kinds of noise on. Which we also fabricated in New York and then shipped them to museums all over the world. So it was a really fun, creative time. Again, even though I wasn't strictly speaking in the music business per se, there was always a musical component to it. But then partly what happened is that with the advent of the internet, for the first time in decades, I was able to reconnect with my original audience. I put up a website in the '90s, and after a while, I had accumulated a lot of songs and wanted to do a new album. And I just wrote an email to everyone on my mailing list saying, look, I got all these songs. I'd like to do a new album, and I don't want to wait another 16, 17 years for a label to give me permission to do it. If you pre-order it in advance, I'll have the money to upgrade the studio, pay musicians, and I'll deliver an album in a year. I was a little nervous that everyone was going to say, no, Dean, why don't you get a proper job like everybody else? And some people actually did say that, but enough people supported the idea so that I was able to crowdfund what became, in 2001, my Treehouse Journals album. Bearing in mind, this was 9 years or 8 or 9 years before Kickstarter ever even launched. There was a band in England called Marillion, who is acknowledged as the first musical act to crowdfund on the internet. And I may be the second, because it was just a few months after they did that for their U.S. tour. In any case, that's how I'm able to mount my tours and fund new album projects, by the good graces and generosity of my enthusiastic listening audience, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, so this timeline I'm actually following. You said around 2001 you were able to create your website. A lot of people don't realize, but the computers were really starting to kind of develop around that time.
Well, it's true. I think the website was sort of mid-'90s, but the work I was doing for my virtual reality video games for InVideo was originally based on the Amiga computer, which in its day was the most powerful consumer PC out of the box because it had custom graphics and audio chips, which made it possible to do the games that I was designing and programming. And but eventually, as time went on, I started, I was using not just the Amiga, but Macs and IBM PCs. And ultimately settled mostly on a PC environment, but still use the Mac. But it's true, as the technology became more and more powerful, it was suddenly possible to record a high-quality professional studio album in your basement or your bedroom. And instead of needing $2 million or $3 million to build a recording studio, which is what it would have taken in the 60s or 70s, by the time of the 90s, you could do as good a quality production for a couple of thousand on a laptop. So that was a real sea change in terms of access to production tools. And at the same time, the internet and now things like streaming suddenly gave musicians not just access to the technology for production, but access to distribution. Because suddenly there was a means of distributing your music to everyone in the planet, all over the planet, without necessarily having to deal with all the middlemen that are part of any industry in terms of distribution, and there are still gatekeepers, except for rare occasions where things go viral naturally, organically. But the point is that access to music production tools became democratized, and access to the distribution tools became democratized. And so what it means is that the more and more people were able to pursue the love of music and songwriting and record production in ways that would have been prohibitive years ago. The downside of that is that the potential to make a living and generate revenue with all these tools is also been diminished significantly by virtue of that same decentralization. But it's, I still view it as a positive trend to enable people the chance to do what I've been doing for a long time, which is to pursue that art form and to be able to express that creativity in ways that I loved listening to and enjoying growing up as someone who loved music, and then to be able to have the chance and opportunity to do it myself.
Yes. I just wanted to circle back to something that you had said just a few minutes ago about how you feel that you were the second group after Marillion to kind of give the music lovers an opportunity to hear your music. How was that done? Was it like, how did you put that together?
Well, it was an early form of crowdfunding. It's the way, independent musicians today, most of them fund their efforts, whether it's by Kickstarter or Patreon, all the different crowdfunding platforms that allow, or GoFundMe, platforms that allow people to invite their audience to help contribute to the funding of a production of a creative endeavor. And I essentially did that same thing many years before Kickstarter was launched by simply sending an email to 1,000 people on my email list, as I described, saying, I got these songs I'd like to record. If you order it in advance, I'll make an album. So that was just a very early, modest form of crowdfunding. And sure enough, they sent me enough money to do it, and I recorded the album. I manufactured CDs, and I shipped them out. And the deal was done. And that's, again, how I've been doing it ever since, and how independent musicians all over the world have been doing that for a number of years now. And God bless them.
Yes, it's quite a lot of work. I mean, it's a labor of love, because you can imagine just the shipping alone takes a lot of time to be doing all of this.
But it's also something that's satisfying.
That I understand, yeah.
Look, there's pros and cons to being an independent anything, especially in the arts. The pro is that you have that independence, and you don't necessarily have anyone looking over your shoulder telling you how to do it and what not to do, and what they don't like and what you don't like. You can go a long way towards realizing your own particular creative vision. And that's something that's a blessing. That's really satisfying. The downside is you don't have a $5 million marketing and promotion budget and production budget to do it all together with all the videos that are now part and parcel of any musical release. But look, independent musicians today, they find a way to get the job done. So much has changed in so many respects. I mean, we could do a whole week's worth of podcasts on the changes in the music industry. But one of the most significant, from my perspective, is the fact that it's really no longer the music business. It's really a music video business, because music videos, or some music or video aspects of promotion or supplementing a release is so fundamental a part of the music now that it's hard to see them as separate entities, even though on some level they are. But what it means is that, for me, I'm no longer just recording music and audio and making a record. At some stage, I'm also producing video. So that's sort of another related tool set and skill set that I've sort of cobbled together and acquired over the years. That's also fun and satisfying and just as creative as sitting down at a piano and pecking out a melody. To me, all these art forms are just forms of play. And so when I was getting into designing video games in that virtual reality environment, it was really no different than strumming my guitar and figuring out what the chord progression was going to be. I was having fun playing with these tools, and it was just a different kind of a tool with different parameters, but it was still just fun. That's what motivated me and compelled me to keep doing it. Certainly wasn't the money because I never made that much, but what little I made helped keep the electricity on.
Well, that's
and
good.
helped keep the studio running.
Yeah.
But it was that fun and satisfaction and delight and creating something that wasn't there before.
Yes. You mentioned the video aspect, and I very often on these shows that I do, many people reference MTV in the early days of MTV. And really that changed the face of music in some way. And I think when you mention even current day, that really has held up, that a lot of times people expect to just see the artist, not just hear it, but see the artist and hear the artist at the same time.
Certainly. Well, there's no question that MTV really cemented that wedding. Although that visual audio marriage had been going on in musicals and in film for decades before MTV. But it's a curious marriage because sometimes the video expression of an audio piece of work can supplement that audio in ways that inform the story that's being told. But sometimes it can be the diametric opposite. It's always a challenge to find a way to express visually something that I created originally from a narrative storytelling perspective orally. And, sometimes you get it right and sometimes you might miss, but it's still fun to do.
Oh, yeah. Well, you really have had such an exciting career. There was a time during 2005, I think you were trying to put together a performance, and I think they tried to stop you during that performance. I think it was almost canceled because you were trying to arrange to give out samples of something. Is that correct?
Well, you must be referring to an occasion. I had booked a 40-city tour in all over the UK and Ireland. So, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Irish Republic. And it was also to promote a new album called Squirrels in the Attic, which is an album that I put out in 2005. And what was distinct about that album than all my other albums, that it was just comedy songs, but comedy songs for adults, with some adult topics and themes. And in particular, one song that I'd written called Doint Doint, it's just a little joint. And it's just a silly, fun song, but making the serious point that, for all the protests and the illegality at that time, and still in some states, of this innocent herbal remedy, that in fact, cannabis was no more dangerous than alcohol. In fact, it was considerably less dangerous than alcohol. So I expressed those sentiments in what I think is a pretty funny, silly song called Doint Doint. It's just a little joint. And so one night I thought, well, gee, I need a tour sponsor that maybe can contribute something to funding this tour. And I wrote an email to all the cannabis seed distributors in Europe, because at the time it was perfectly legal to sell cannabis seeds all over England, as long as they didn't get wet. If they get wet, then they could germinate and they could turn into what would consider to be a Class C drug, and that would be illegal. But as long as it didn't rain and get wet all over your bag of cannabis seeds, you could walk into a police station, they couldn't do anything to you. So I thought, well, this is great. So I sent an email with a copy of the song to all these online distributors. And one of them wrote back and said, yeah, I love the song. We're going to contribute 1,000 little seed packets of cannabis seeds that you can give away to the first 10 people that buy CDs at every one of your gigs. And I thought, wow, this is great. So I wrote up a press release and I sent it out to all over the UK. Within 48 hours of sending out this press release, almost every venue on the tour, except for one up in Scotland, contacted me to cancel the tour. They were just up in arms about the idea that I would distribute cannabis seeds at the gig. Even though I argued that, look, you're selling alcohol to your patrons, sending them home driving drunk, and these seeds are not going to even blossom. They're not going to bloom for another 6 months. And they didn't care. So I had to reconstitute the tour and promise that I wasn't going to distribute these cannabis seeds on the premises. Ironically, those venues that protested the most, that actually canceled the tour, then reconstituted the tour. And the ones that got the most bad publicity are the ones that sold out. So it was a lesson. It was a lesson in the well-crafted press release. And I still have some of those cannabis seeds from that 2005 tour.
Were they watching you like a hawk?
Well, unfortunately, it's there's not quite the onus that there was in those days. It was very instructive and illuminating, and
yes, and very creative. I think that's probably what got them, was that you actually kind of did your research and you presented it in a professional way, that it was paired with your whole kind of imagination, using your imagination to go hand in hand with your song. I think probably threw them. And then when they realized this could become too big for us, that's probably why it changed their mind.
Well, I got a kick out of it.
Well, it leads for a good story. How's that? And you didn't have all these canceled concerts. You actually had, just the positive. That's why everything in life is about intention. Your intention was for the good. So when you have good intention, it always comes out in a positive way. So that's really terrific. I'm so impressed. I was, reading about you, and I understand that you go over overseas 2 or 3 times a year, and you really still sell out with a lot of your performances. So can you bring me on that journey of seeing a concert or attending a concert overseas? When you meet the fans, are they mostly locals, or do you see people from America that haven't had the chance to see you go over and do that part of their, travel or tourism?
Well, they're mostly UK or Ireland residents, and I'd say the majority are folks that have been fans from my early days starting out in the music business, and that's really satisfying. But they're also now bringing their kids or even their grandkids, and that's a lot of fun. But as you suggest, I definitely will run into folks from the States who are, traveling across the pond for whatever reason and make a point to come to one of my gigs. And so it's always fun to touch base. Like I say, it's a little bit of a schlep. I'm not a fan of flying and all the traveling that's involved. But it's always worthwhile because I get to share my songs with what's always a very enthusiastic and appreciative audience. And that makes it worthwhile.
What does your upcoming tour schedule look like for the rest of this year?
On the road in England for 3 weeks in May. Then I'm back home for a while, and then I go back again. I do Ireland and Scotland and a few dates in England in August, another 3 weeks in August. So I tour about maybe 8 to 10 weeks a year. And the rest of the time I'm home doing whatever it is that I do, writing, hopefully recording when I get around to it, and all the logistics that go into putting together a 40-city tour.
That's so great. So where can people reach out to you? Do you have social media? What is your website? You can plug all that now.
Sure. Folks can find me at deanfriedman.com. That's my main website. It's kind of ancient, so but it works. And you can find, all my early albums and my more recent albums. My latest album is called American Lullaby, which I'm real proud of. And you can hear all my music in all the streaming services like Spotify or Apple or Amazon. But I would hasten to add to your listeners that when you enjoy an artist's music on any of these streaming services, they're only getting paid a fraction of a penny every time you hear a song. So if you want to support an artist, then feel free to listen on streaming services, but you might consider making a point of ordering one of their physical CDs or products on their websites directly from the artist, because that's the only way to actually support an artist. Because, I get hundreds of thousands of streams on a regular basis of my music. And at thousandth of a penny per stream, that doesn't add that much to much. I use Spotify myself, so I enjoy listening to stuff, but I also try to make a point of supporting the artists direct. It makes a difference.
Yes, well, I totally appreciate that. So you have selected I Wish You Joy for our exit song, which we're going to roll out with. And I just want to thank you again, Dean Friedman. You're an amazing person. You're an American singer and songwriter, and your music is going to be listened to forever. Thank you again for being on this show.
Catherine, it's a pleasure and lovely to meet you, and hope to catch up with you again. And thanks to your audience for listening. And just to say that I Wish You Joy is a song off of the latest album, American Lullaby, written during the pandemic, and the whole album deals with a lot of difficult topics. But I wanted to make a special point of including uplifting, optimistic themes that could sort of give people a better perspective on any difficulties they were going through.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to roll out now with I Wish You Joy. Thank you again for being on, Dean.
All the best, Catherine.
Thank you.
I can see by the frown on your face you're in dire need of a warm embrace. When it feels like you're running in place and all pleasure's gone without a trace. I wish you joy. I wish you joy. I wish you laughter, elation, delight, jubilation, poor boy. When each day is a battle anew, and your darkest fears obscure your view, and it feels like you'll never pull through, there's a remedy that's tried and true. I wish you joy. I wish you joy. I wish you laughter, elation, delight, jubilation, oh boy. I wish you joy. Like more than you can bear, just step outside and breathe the morning air. Make a vow or say a prayer. Clear your mind, you're sure to find that miracles are everywhere. Sadness swells up in your heart, and good cheer appears to depart, there's one piece of advice I'll impart. It's that finding grace is the place to start. I wish you joy. I wish you joy. I wish you laughter, elation, delight, jubilation, dear boy. I wish you joy. Joy, 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 joy.
Side of the Hudson, deep in the bosom of suburbia, I met a young girl, she sang mighty fine, tears on my pillow and Ave Maria. Standing by the waterfall in Paramus Park, she was working for the Friends of BAI. She was collecting the waters in a paper cup. She was looking for change, and so was I. She was a Jewish girl, I fell in love with her. She wrote her number on the back of my hand. I called her up, I was all out of breath. I said, come hear me play in my rock and roll band. I took a shower and I put on my best blue jeans. I picked her up in my new VW Vans. She wore a peasant blouse with nothing underneath. I said hi, she said, yeah, I guess I am. Ariel. Ariel. We had a little time, we were real hungry. We went to Dairy Queen for something to eat. She had some onion rings, she had a pickle. She forgot to tell me that she didn't eat me. I had a gig in the American Legion Hall. It was a dance for the volunteer ambulance corps. She was sitting in a corner against the wall. She would smile and I melted all over the floor. Took her home with me, we watched TV, a net cello and some guy going steady. I started fooling around with the vertical hold. We got the munchies and I made some spaghetti. We sat and we talked into the night while Channel 2 was signing off the air. I found the softness of the mouth. We made love to bombs bursting in suburbia. I met a young girl, she sang mighty fine. Tears on my pillow and Ave Maria. Tears on my pillow and Ave Maria. Tears on my pillow and Ave Maria. What